The entire factory floor went silent. Hundreds of employees stood behind the yellow safety line as CEO Victoria Kane stepped onto the platform and pointed toward a grease-stained mechanic holding his young daughter's hand. Effective immediately, you're terminated. Whispers exploded through the crowd. Ethan Brooks, a single father known for fixing impossible engine problems, said nothing. He simply removed his company badge and slipped it into his pocket. Victoria turned away, convinced she had eliminated a troublesome employee who kept questioning her newest luxury performance engine. Then a senior engineer rushed through the crowd, carrying a sealed archive folder. His face went pale. "Ma'am, you need to see this." Inside the folder was a forgotten document containing a name nobody expected. The mechanic's name. And attached to it was evidence suggesting he wasn't just repairing the engine. He may have been the person who designed it. Victoria froze. Because if that document was real, firing Ethan had just triggered a disaster no one saw coming. The sound of machinery faded into the background as hundreds of employees gathered around the assembly floor. Conversations stopped one by one until only the hum of overhead lights remained. At the center of the crowd stood Ethan Brooks, his work shirt stained with oil from a morning spent repairing engines. Beside him was his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, clutching his hand tightly after school had let out early for a company family event. On the raised platform, Victoria Kane adjusted the microphone and looked across the crowd with the confidence that had made her one of the youngest CEOs in the automotive industry. "We have worked too hard on this launch to tolerate disruption from anyone," she announced. Employees exchanged confused glances. Victoria's eyes settled on Ethan. "Mr. Brooks has repeatedly challenged decisions made by our engineering leadership. He has created delays, ignored directives, and interfered with a project that represents the future of this company." A murmur swept through the factory. Ethan remained silent. Several workers looked uncomfortable. Most knew Ethan as the mechanic who stayed late to help others finish difficult repairs. He was the person everyone called when an engine problem seemed impossible to solve. Victoria continued. "Effective immediately, your employment is terminated." The words hit the room like a hammer. Lily squeezed her father's hand harder. "Dad?" she whispered. Ethan looked down at her and forced a small smile. "It's okay, sweetheart." But even he couldn't hide the disappointment in his eyes. The crowd watched as Victoria stepped away from the microphone. To her, the matter was finished. To everyone else, something felt wrong. Ethan reached into his pocket and removed his employee badge. He stared at it for a moment. 15 years of work. 15 years of overtime shifts, missed holidays, and sleepless nights solving problems nobody else could fix. Without saying a word, he placed the badge on a nearby table. The silence became almost unbearable. One of the younger mechanics stepped forward. "Sir, this can't be right." His supervisor immediately pulled him back. Nobody wanted to challenge the CEO publicly. Lily looked up at her father. "Did you do something bad?" The question hurt more than losing the job. Ethan knelt beside her. "No, Guido." "Then why are they making you leave?" For a second, he couldn't answer. Because explaining corporate politics to a child was impossible. Because explaining betrayal was even harder. "Sometimes people make decisions before they know the whole story," he finally said. Lily nodded slowly, though she clearly didn't understand. Across the floor, Victoria was already speaking with board members and investors who had attended the event. The luxury performance engine scheduled for launch next month was attracting enormous attention. The company expected record profits. Everything seemed under control. Then a voice echoed from the far end of the factory. "Victoria." Heads turned. A senior engineer hurried through the crowd carrying a thick archive folder. His face looked unusually pale. "Victoria Froneth." "What is it?" The engineer stopped at the base of the platform, breathing heavily. "I was reviewing old project records after this morning's audit." And the man swallowed. "You need to look at this immediately." Victoria accepted the folder with visible irritation. Around them, employees stretched their necks to see. The engineer opened the file and pointed toward a page buried deep inside. At first, Victoria appeared unimpressed. Then her expression changed. The confidence vanished from her face. She stared at a signature printed at the bottom of the document. A signature belonging to Ethan Brooks. Her eyes moved to the title above it. The crowd noticed her hands tighten around the folder. "What is it?" one executive asked. Victoria didn't answer. For the first time all day, she looked toward the factory exit where Ethan and Lily were slowly walking away. And suddenly, the CEO wasn't thinking about the man she had just fired. She was thinking about a question that made her stomach drop. Why was a mechanic's name appearing on documents connected to the original development of the company's most valuable engine? Ethan had almost reached the parking lot when he heard the factory doors swing open behind him. Voices echoed across the concrete, but he didn't turn around. He had spent enough years inside those walls to know that looking back rarely changed anything. Lily skipped beside him, trying to be brave. "Can we still get ice cream?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. A small laugh escaped his lips. "Yeah, I think we could still get ice cream." She smiled, satisfied with the answer. For her, the world was still simple. Ice cream could fix a bad day. A hug could solve most problems. Ethan wished life worked that way for adults. As they reached his old pickup truck, his phone began vibrating. One call, then another, then 3 more. Every call came from someone at the company. He ignored them all. Meanwhile, back inside the factory, tension was spreading through the executive floor. Victoria sat at the head of a conference table while senior managers and engineers crowded around her. The archive folder lay open in front of them. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, the company's chief legal officer broke the silence. "Tell me I'm misunderstanding what I'm reading." Victoria looked at the document again. "I wish you were." The engineer who had found the file cleared his throat. The original prototype project began 16 years ago. Most records were transferred to storage after the program was canceled. "And Ethan Brooks appears on those records?" asked a board member. "Not just appears." The engineer slid another page across the table. According to these notes, he wasn't a mechanic at the time. Several executives leaned forward. What was he? The engineer hesitated. Junior design specialist. The room exploded with questions. Victoria raised her hand. Quiet. Everyone stopped. She studied the papers carefully. Years ago, before becoming a mechanic, Ethan had apparently worked with a small experimental team developing advanced engine technology. The same technology that eventually evolved into the company's flagship performance engine. Victoria felt a knot forming in her stomach. This made no sense. If Ethan had played such an important role, why was he working on the factory floor repairing vehicles? Why wasn't he listed among the company's lead engineers? Why had nobody mentioned this before? The legal officer spoke again. "There's another problem." The room turned toward him. If these documents are accurate, the intellectual property trail may be incomplete. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "The engine launch next month is valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. If someone contributed significantly and wasn't properly credited, we need to know immediately." Silence returned. Nobody liked where the conversation was heading. An executive responsible for investor relations leaned forward. "The investors cannot hear about this." "They will if there's a lawsuit," the legal officer replied. The words landed heavily. Across town, Ethan sat with Lily inside a small ice cream shop. The television, mounted in the corner, was showing business news. A segment about Kane Motors appeared on the screen. Lily was focused on her chocolate cone. Ethan was focused on staying calm. His savings would cover a few months. After that, things became uncertain. He looked at his daughter and pushed the worry aside. She deserved one peaceful afternoon. His phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't a company executive. It was a number he hadn't seen in years. A retired engineer named Walter Hayes. Ethan stared at the screen. Walter had worked on the old prototype program long ago. Someone he hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. After a moment, Ethan answered, "Hello." The voice on the other end sounded serious. "Ethan, where are you?" "What?" A long pause followed. Then Walter said something that instantly erased any chance of a peaceful afternoon. "Because people are finally asking questions about the engine." Ethan's expression changed. "What questions?" Walter lowered his voice, the kind that could expose what really happened 16 years ago. And before Ethan could respond, Walter added one more sentence. There's a document missing from the archive, and if someone finds it, everything changes. Ethan tightened his grip on the phone as Walter's words echoed in his mind. A missing document? He asked quietly. Across the table, Lily continued eating her ice cream, completely unaware that the past Ethan had spent years trying to forget was suddenly catching up to him. Walter sighed. It's worse than that. Ethan leaned back in his chair. What are you talking about? The company found part of the archive. Not all of it. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Ethan already knew where this conversation was heading. 16 years earlier, a small experimental engineering team had worked on a project so ambitious that most executives believed it would fail. Funding was limited. Deadlines were impossible. The team spent countless nights inside a cramped development building trying to solve problems nobody else could solve. Most people had forgotten that project ever existed. Ethan hadn't. Walter's voice became lower. The page containing the final attribution records is gone. Ethan closed his eyes. Of course it was. That page had always been the most important one. Who knows about this? Ethan asked. Not many people yet. And Victoria? She's asking questions. Ethan gave a humorless laugh. I bet she is. Back at company headquarters, Victoria stood inside a records room surrounded by stacks of old project files. She hated uncertainty. She hated mysteries even more. The archive folder sat open on a nearby desk while employees searched through boxes of historical documents. Nothing made sense. Every new record seemed to point toward Ethan playing a larger role in the project than anyone realized. Yet every crucial piece of evidence seemed incomplete. A young analyst approached her. We found another project report. Victoria immediately took it. The report contained engineering notes, prototype evaluations, and development timelines. But one detail caught her attention. The authorship section listed multiple contributors. Several names had check marks beside them. One name had been crossed out. Ethan Brooks. Victoria stared at it. Who crossed this out? The analyst shook his head. No idea. When? We don't know. A cold feeling settled in her chest. Someone hadn't merely forgotten Ethan. Someone had intentionally removed him. Across town, Walter arrived at the ice cream shop. His hair had turned gray since Ethan last saw him, but the determination in his eyes remained unchanged. After greeting Lily, he sat down across from Ethan. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Walter slid a small notebook across the table. Ethan immediately recognized it. His notebook, the one he thought had disappeared years ago. He opened it carefully. Inside were sketches, calculations, prototype diagrams, handwritten ideas. Memories rushed back instantly. Long nights, endless testing, dreams of creating something revolutionary. Walter watched his reaction. I found it in storage. Ethan slowly turned another page. And another. Then he stopped. His expression hardened. A folded sheet of paper had been tucked inside the notebook. One he had never seen before. What is this? Walter shook his head. I haven't opened it. Ethan carefully unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the contents. His heart skipped. The document wasn't a design. It wasn't a technical report. It was a meeting summary. A summary from the week before the project was shut down. Several executive signatures appeared at the bottom. One sentence had been highlighted. Ethan read it twice. Then a third time. Walter noticed the change in his face. What does it say? Ethan looked up slowly. Years of confusion were beginning to form a clear picture. It says the project succeeded. Walter frowned. What? The executives publicly declared the project a failure. Walter nodded. They did. Ethan tapped the paper. This document says the exact opposite. Silence filled the table. If the project had succeeded, then someone had lied. If someone had lied, then the shutdown wasn't caused by technical problems. It was caused by something else. Something hidden. Something valuable. Walter leaned forward. What does that mean? Ethan looked through the shop window toward the city skyline where Kane Motors dominated the horizon. It means somebody buried the truth. At that exact moment, hundreds of employees at headquarters received an emergency meeting notice. Mandatory attendance. Executive level. Immediate. And as Victoria entered the boardroom carrying the newest evidence, she had no idea that another retired engineer was already driving toward headquarters with a sealed box containing records nobody had seen in 16 years. The emergency board meeting began less than an hour later. Executives filled every seat around the polished conference table. Investor representatives joined through video screens mounted on the walls. The atmosphere felt nothing like the celebration that had been planned for the company's upcoming engine launch. Victoria stood at the front of the room holding a stack of documents. No one was smiling. No one was talking. Everyone sensed that something much bigger than a personnel dispute was unfolding. "We have discovered inconsistencies in historical project records," Victoria began. That was the most cautious way she could phrase it. An investor immediately interrupted. Inconsistencies or liabilities? The room grew even quieter. Victoria glanced at the legal team before answering. "We don't know yet." Several investors exchanged concerned looks. Not knowing was rarely a good sign. Before anyone could ask another question, the conference room doors opened. A security officer entered. Behind him walked an elderly man carrying a weathered storage box. Victoria recognized him from the employee records she had reviewed earlier. Samuel Pierce, another retired engineer from the original prototype program. The man carefully placed the box on the table. "I was told these files might be important." Every eye in the room focused on the box. Years of dust covered the lid. Samuel slowly opened it. Inside were binders, engineering journals, project reports, and dozens of handwritten notes. The room suddenly felt like an archaeological dig, uncovering a forgotten civilization. For the next hour, documents were reviewed one by one. The deeper they searched, the stranger the story became. Each record revealed another piece of the puzzle. Prototype failures, design revisions, technical breakthroughs, meeting summaries, patent drafts. Then they found something that changed everything. A development report signed by multiple engineers. Victoria carefully read the first page, then the second, then the third. Her pulse quickened. According to the report, the breakthrough efficiency system powering the company's flagship engine had originated from a solution proposed by one person. Ethan Brooks, not an executive, not a famous engineer, not a consultant, the mechanic she had fired that morning. The room erupted with reactions. "That's impossible. No one ever mentioned this. How was this hidden?" The legal officer took the report and reviewed it himself. His face became serious. "The documentation is detailed." An investor leaned forward. "How detailed?" The lawyer flipped through several pages. "Detailed enough to establish authorship." A heavy silence followed. The significance was enormous. The flagship engine represented years of investment and future revenue projections worth hundreds of millions. And now evidence suggested its most valuable innovation came from someone whose contribution had never been publicly recognized. Victoria sat down slowly. For the first time since becoming CEO, she felt completely blindsided. Samuel cleared his throat. "I wondered when somebody would finally look." The room turned toward him. "You knew about this?" Victoria asked. "I knew Ethan deserved more credit than he received. Why didn't you say something?" The old engineer gave a sad smile. "Many of us tried." That answer raised even more questions. "What happened?" Victoria asked. Samuel hesitated. Then he spoke carefully. "There are people who believed Ethan was too young to lead such an important project. Some executives preferred a different narrative." The room listened closely. After the project ended, names started disappearing from reports. Victoria's jaw tightened. "Deliberately?" Samuel nodded. "Not all at once. Slowly, quietly." Several executives looked uncomfortable. Nobody wanted to imagine what that meant. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan sat at his kitchen table reviewing the notebook Walter had recovered. Lily was asleep in the next room. For hours he studied old sketches and calculations. Many memories were painful. Others were surprisingly clear. Then something slipped from between two pages. A folded envelope. One he had never noticed before. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside was a copy of an unsigned patent application. His eyes widened. The filing date matched the original prototype project. But what shocked him wasn't the invention. It was the ownership section. Someone had attempted to transfer rights away from the original creator. And attached to the application was a handwritten note consisting of only 7 words. Ethan stared at them in disbelief, because the note revealed exactly who had benefited from burying the truth 16 years ago. Ethan read the handwritten note again, then a third time. The words were short, almost careless, as if the person who wrote them never expected anyone to see them again. But to Ethan, they explained years of unanswered questions. For a long moment, he sat motionless at the kitchen table. The house was quiet. Only the ticking of a wall clock broke the silence. Walter watched from across the room. "What is it?" he asked. Ethan slowly lowered the paper. "I think I know why everything disappeared." Walter leaned forward. "Who?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. The name written on the note belonged to someone who had once been considered untouchable inside the company. A powerful executive from the old leadership team. A man who had retired years ago with awards, recognition, and a reputation for visionary leadership. Someone nobody would ever suspect. Walter's expression darkened when Ethan finally revealed the name. "I should have guessed," he muttered. "You knew him?" Walter nodded. Everyone did. The old engineer stared toward the window. He always wanted control of that project. Ethan folded the note carefully. The revelation explained why records had vanished, why reports had changed, why his career path had suddenly shifted from design work to mechanical operations. Someone had quietly moved him out of the spotlight. And for years, he had accepted the official explanation without realizing what had really happened. Back at Kane Motors headquarters, the investigation was beginning to create panic. Rumors spread through every department. Employees whispered in hallways. Engineers exchanged messages. Managers held closed-door meetings. The story was becoming impossible to contain. Victoria sat inside her office reviewing the newest findings when the legal team entered. The lead attorney looked concerned. "We have another issue." Victoria rubbed her temples. "Of course we do." The attorney placed a document on her desk. "We located old security logs." Victoria immediately looked up. "What do they show?" The archive records weren't accidentally modified. A chill ran through her. The attorney continued. "According to the logs, specific files were accessed repeatedly over a 6-month period. By who?" The attorney hesitated. "Someone with executive-level authorization." Victoria felt her stomach tighten. The evidence was no longer pointing toward a misunderstanding. It was pointing toward intentional manipulation. As more records surfaced, another troubling discovery emerged. The executive identified in Ethan's note had personally approved several internal promotions shortly after the prototype project ended. Those promotions included individuals who later received public credit for innovations connected to the engine program. The pattern was becoming difficult to ignore. Someone had benefited. Someone had gained prestige. Someone had built an entire career on a version of history that might not be true. Meanwhile, investors were growing nervous. A private meeting was called that evening. The atmosphere inside the boardroom was tense. One investor spoke bluntly. "If these allegations become public, what exposure are we facing?" The legal officer answered carefully. "That depends on what else is discovered." The response did little to reassure anyone. Another investor leaned forward. "What about Ethan Brooks?" The room became quiet. "What about him?" Victoria asked. "If he possesses evidence that supports these claims, then he's no longer a former mechanic." The investor paused. "He's the most important person connected to this company." Those words landed heavily. For the first time, Victoria realized how dramatically the balance of power had shifted. Only 24 hours earlier, Ethan had been standing on a factory floor holding his daughter's hand while being fired in front of hundreds of employees. Across town, Ethan's phone rang again. This time a caller ID displayed a number he recognized instantly. Kane Motors' executive office. He stared at the screen. Walter raised an eyebrow. "You going to answer?" Ethan looked at the phone for several seconds. Then he accepted the call. A familiar voice spoke immediately. It was Victoria. "Ethan, we need to talk." Ethan remained calm. "I don't work for you anymore." "No," Victoria replied quietly. "That's exactly the problem." Before Ethan could respond, Victoria revealed something that made his expression change instantly. The company had just uncovered evidence that one crucial document was still missing. And according to newly discovered records, Ethan might be the only person alive who knew where it was. Ethan remained silent after hearing Victoria's words. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. Walter watched him carefully from across the table. On the other end of the call, Victoria waited. "Ethan," she said, "what makes you think I know where this document is?" "Because your name appears in the last chain of records connected to it." Ethan frowned. "That's impossible." "So I thought." Victoria sounded nothing like the confident CEO who had fired him in front of hundreds of employees. There was uncertainty in her voice now, maybe even concern. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "What document are we talking about?" "A final project authorization file." Walter's eyes widened when he heard the description. Victoria continued. "According to the archive records, it was completed just before the prototype program was shut down." Ethan exchanged a glance with Walter. They both understood the significance immediately. If the document existed, it could answer nearly every question surrounding the project. Ownership, contributions, approvals, the truth. "When do you want to meet?" Ethan asked. "Tonight." Hours later, Ethan arrived at company headquarters. The irony wasn't lost on him. Less than a day earlier, security would have escorted him out. Now security officers opened doors for him. Employees stared as he walked through the lobby. Whispers followed him everywhere. Some recognized him. Others had only heard the rumors. The fire mechanic, the hidden designer, the man at the center of the company's biggest mystery. Victoria was waiting in a private conference room. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them was obvious. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. "I owe you an apology." Ethan looked at her calmly. "That doesn't sound easy for you." "No, it isn't." She didn't try to justify her actions, didn't make excuses, didn't blame anyone else. That alone surprised Ethan. Victoria slid several documents across the table. "We found more evidence." Ethan reviewed the pages. His expression grew serious. The security logs, the altered reports, the missing signatures. Each piece strengthened the same conclusion. Someone had deliberately rewritten history. Victoria folded her hands. "I need to know something." "What? Did you know any of this?" Ethan looked down at the papers. "For years I suspected parts of it, and I never had proof." Victoria nodded slowly. That answer felt honest. Then Ethan's eyes stopped on a specific date inside one of the records. A memory surfaced instantly. An old storage facility. A loquet cabinet. A project shutdown meeting. His heart skipped. Suddenly, he remembered something. Not a document. A box. After the prototype program ended, employees had been instructed to remove personal materials from their workspaces. Ethan had packed everything into a storage box and taken it home. Most of it contained notebooks, sketches, and technical references. He hadn't looked through it in years. Walter, who had accompanied him to headquarters, noticed the change in his face. "What is it?" Ethan looked up. "I think I know where the file might be." Victoria leaned forward immediately. "You do?" "Maybe. Where?" Ethan hesitated. "If it's where I think it is, nobody has touched it for 16 years. The room fell silent. An hour later, Ethan unlocked a small storage unit on the outskirts of the city. Dust covered nearly everything inside. Old furniture, boxes, tools, memories from another life. Using a flashlight, he moved deeper into the unit. Victoria stood nearby. Walter followed behind. Finally, Ethan stopped in front of a stack of sealed containers. One box carried a faded project label. His pulse quickened. Slowly, he opened it. Inside were notebooks, technical reports, photographs, folders. Then, buried beneath everything else, sat a thick sealed envelope. The original company seal remained intact. Nobody had opened it. Not once. For 16 years. Victoria stared at it. So that's it. Ethan carefully picked up the envelope. I don't know. His hands felt unexpectedly heavy. Whatever was inside could change countless lives. Careers. Reputations. Possibly the future of the company itself. With everyone watching, Ethan broke the seal. He removed the contents. The first page appeared ordinary. The second page was more important. Then he reached the final document. His eyes widened. Walter's face went pale. Victoria stopped breathing for a moment. Because the document didn't merely prove Ethan's contribution to the engine. It revealed something far bigger. The company's entire flagship program had been built around a design legally registered under Ethan's name. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The only sound inside the storage unit was the faint buzz of the overhead light. Victoria stared at the document in Ethan's hands as if it were impossible. Let me see it. Ethan carefully passed the papers to her. She read the first page, then the second. Then she reached the registration records attached to the back. Her expression changed completely. The legal language was clear. The core architecture of the engine, the system that had transformed an experimental prototype into a market-changing innovation, had originally been registered under Ethan Brooks. Not under the company, not under the executive team, not under any of the engineers who later received recognition. Ethan Brooks. Walter shook his head slowly. After all these years, Victoria looked up. How was this never found? Walter gave a sad laugh. Because nobody wanted to find it. The answer hung heavily in the air. Back at headquarters, the legal team worked through the night. Copies of the newly discovered documents were delivered to attorneys, auditors, and board members. The deeper they investigated, the more undeniable the truth became. A chain of decisions had gradually removed Ethan from the official story. Each step had seemed small at the time. A missing credit, a revised report, a reassigned position, an altered presentation. Together, those decisions had buried the real creator behind layers of corporate history. By sunrise, emergency meetings were being scheduled across the company. Investors demanded answers. Board members demanded accountability. And employees demanded the truth. For the first time in years, the company wasn't talking about the upcoming engine launch. It was talking about Ethan. Meanwhile, Ethan sat quietly at home drinking coffee while Lily prepared for school. The contrast felt surreal. The corporate world was in chaos. His daughter was deciding which backpack to use. Dad, he looked up. What is it, kiddo? Are you going back to work? The simple question caught him off guard. I don't know yet. She thought for a moment, then smiled. I hope wherever you work next, they know you're smart. Ethan laughed softly. The innocence of the comment hit harder than any boardroom revelation. Before he could answer, his phone rang again. Victoria. He answered. What now? We need you at headquarters. Ethan sighed. Another emergency? Something like that. Her tone was different. Less defensive. More respectful. What happened? The board reviewed the documents. And Victoria paused. Then she said words Ethan never expected to hear. They voted unanimously. His eyebrows lifted. For what? To formally recognize your authorship and contributions. Ethan sat quietly. After 16 years, recognition should have felt satisfying. Instead, it felt strangely distant. The past couldn't be undone. The lost years couldn't be returned. Victoria continued. There's more. Ethan listened. The board wants to offer you a leadership position. Walter, sitting nearby, nearly dropped his coffee. Ethan shook his head. They move fast. They don't want to lose you. Ethan looked out the window. For years, nobody had wanted his opinion. Now everyone wanted his signature. His approval. His cooperation. The irony wasn't lost on him. A few hours later, Ethan arrived at headquarters once again. This time the atmosphere was completely different. Employees stopped what they were doing when he entered. Some nodded respectfully. Others quietly applauded. Word had spread throughout the building. The mechanic they had worked beside for years was actually the mind behind the company's most important innovation. As Ethan walked toward the boardroom, he noticed something unexpected. A large frame display had been placed in the lobby overnight. It contained photographs from the original prototype project. At the center was a young Ethan standing beside the first successful engine model. His name appeared beneath the image. For the first time in 16 years, Ethan stared at the display. Victoria approached from behind. "You deserved that a long time ago." Before Ethan could answer, the boardroom doors opened. Inside, investors, executives, and directors were already waiting. But this wasn't another investigation. This wasn't another emergency meeting. This was the beginning of something new. Because waiting on the conference table was a proposal that could make Ethan far more than an employee. It could make him one of the most powerful people in the company. Ethan stepped into the boardroom and immediately noticed the atmosphere had changed. A day earlier, he would have been viewed as a terminated employee. Now every person in the room stood as he entered. Investors, board members, senior executives, people who rarely stood for anyone. For a moment, Ethan didn't know how to react. Victoria motioned toward an empty chair at the head of the table. The seat wasn't placed among the guests. It was placed beside the leadership team. Ethan looked at it, then at Victoria. "I think you've got the seating arrangement wrong." A few nervous laughs spread through the room. Victoria shook her head. "No, we don't." Ethan slowly sat down. The board chairman opened a folder. "Mr. Brooks, we've spent the last 24 hours reviewing every piece of evidence connected to the original engine program." Ethan nodded, but remained silent. "We also reviewed the impact your work has had on this company." The chairman paused. "The numbers are extraordinary." Several financial reports were displayed on the large screen. Revenue growth, expansion